Yes. Hello, everybody. This is Timothy McAleer. I'm back with my brother Kevin, an author of 8 or 9 books, a 10th on the way, I believe. And we come here every now and then, like maybe once or twice a month, to talk about some piece of literature, regardless of its quality. And we give our opinions. And anyone who wants to opine about what we're opining on, go ahead and leave them in your comments section, those opinions. And the book we chose this week was Tom Wolfe, not to be confused with Thomas Wolfe. You Can't Go Home Again, Thomas Wolfe from the 20s and 30s. This is Tom Wolfe. He was an excellent writer from New York, a kind of an eccentric personality who always wore white suits and was on the talk show circuits quite often, giving his opinion on many affairs. And he wrote a great book called Bonfire of the Vanities about the New York cultural scene in the 80s, I believe. And then he also is famous for his other book of what was the other book that he's more famous for besides Bonfire of the Vanities, Kevin?
Well, my
Oh,
favorite book of his is The Right Stuff,
The Right Stuff. Okay, let's
about
talk
the
about.
Mercury astronaut program in the early 60s.
Okay, yeah, and maybe at some point we'll do The Right Stuff on this blog, this video log. That would be nice to do, or even Bonfire of the Vanities. I'd be in for that. But right now, the book that Kevin recommended that we look at this week is called From Bauhaus to Our House. I'll show it right here. From Bauhaus to Our House, Tom Wolfe. And Kevin, had you ever read this before, or were you going to just try to take a crack at it the first time around here?
I had read it, but it had been many years ago, and I always like to read Tom Wolfe, no matter the subject. So even if I had read it several times, and it's short, but 140 pages in my edition, it would have been very painless, regardless of how many times I'd read it.
Okay, very good. So what did you think of it now?
Well, I love his prose. He has a very high octane, energizing prose. That's the one thing I most admire about him. He's got a very unique prose style. You open up one of his books without knowing it's by Tom Wolfe, say the cover has been blanked out. After a paragraph, you know it's Tom Wolfe. And that for me is an excellent stylist. And you can't say that about too many writers these days. They're all products of these creative writing schools. They all write the same. They're all afraid of making a mistake, being racist, sexist, homophobe, or something. And so they just tippy toe around. He doesn't tippy toe around, my friend. You know this. You read this book. He gives whatever he is polemicizing both barrels, and I love it. So that for openers. He's a great stylist. And yes, The Right Stuff you mentioned, we may or may not talk about that because I read it very recently. But the problem is with our podcast that I have to read it quite recently to have it in my head. I have a
Oh,
sieve of a brain. So I read something and then it's like 10 days later, I haven't forgotten it, but I've forgotten the essential points to maybe share with our viewership. So I read it about 6 months ago and it's a great book. Why I read it for about the third or fourth time, I have it. But yeah, the point being that I can't get enough of Wolf in whatever form. And so I was very happy to reread this again.
okay, Kev, can you give us a summary of the novel? I know there's not a real narrative with characters in it, like as in a novel. It's real historical personalities, and it's basically giving opinions on different forms of architecture. And you could almost summarize it right there. But can you elaborate a little bit more on it than that, on what we're reading here and discussing?
Okay, you may have misspoke, but it's not a novel. It is far from a novel. It is it is a polemic against modern architecture.
A polemic.
It is nonfiction. It is well researched, and it is not a product of his imagination. Although many critics of this have opined that he is imagining a lot of this stuff. It's his own little he has his own little neuroses regarding modern architecture, and he should just relax, take a load off, and maybe learn a little bit about architecture before he unloads on it. But he does it with great style. The thesis I should think of this book is he is a great opponent of the glass box, as he calls it, style of mid to late 20th century architecture, not only in Europe, but in America. Uh, the book came out in 1981. It had been based on a couple articles. I don't know where he published them, but it came out as a book in 1981. And so that's what we're talking about. So a lot of this may be inapplicable to architecture today. And I have to say, and Tim and I talked about this before we uh, started things up, neither of us are experts in architecture. I will only speak for myself. I have only a very basic knowledge of even the terminology, let alone the history of architecture. So, folks, don't think I'm on my high horse pontificating about architecture. I'm just telling you what Wolfe is saying. And maybe Tim and I can jump in here or there with uh, a couple ideas of our own on architecture and related topics. But this is Wolfe. What he says is that in this period of glass box architecture, you don't have the traditional relationship between the client and the architect. What's the traditional relationship? Well, the traditional relationship is going back to we don't even have to go back to the Greeks and the Romans, but let's just go back into the recent past, as does Wolfe, with Beaux-Arts, right? This style of architecture, a historicist style, where you're bringing back classical designs, Baroque, Renaissance, Gothic in some cases. So you're relying on past cultures to inform your 19th century, early 20th century architectural concepts. And the people who were electing to have such buildings designed and built were the clients, the money men, the corporations, the firms that wanted to house their business in these places. They were, paying out the money. They said, well, we want this, that, and the other one. We don't want a cornice at the top. We don't want uh, we don't want maybe too many windows. We would like to have little triangles over the windows, whatever it might be. It was the client dictating the terms. Well, Wolfe says that in the 20th century, that relationship has flipped. It's now the architects. Uh, it's the schools of architecture. It's the theories. It's what he calls the clerisy, which is dictating to its clients what sort of styles they should pay them lots of money for. And it's a status thing. Wolfe is very big on Max Weber, who was a great theorist about status, right? Status being that not only uh, is the respect you gain in society. Not only is the honor that accrues to you in society based on wealth, on your class, that Marxian category, but it's based on status. You can make a lot of money, but you have no social capital. For example, today you're what? A reality TV star. You make millions of bucks, but who can respect that, right? You don't accrue much honorific capital. So that's what has been, well, he's no longer with us, Mr. Wolfe, died a few years back. But that was, I know through reading other of his books, that was a main concern of his in all his work, in The Right Stuff, in Bonfire of the Vanities, of A Man in Full, his second novel. He is worried about rankings, how we rank ourselves among our peers. And to gain a higher ranking in status in the mid 20th century in America, you had such cool uh, glass boxes which had their origins in the Bauhaus school, which was very cool back then and still has a very cool cachet. You had these kind of buildings built, and it was the architects who were telling you, the client, how to do it. And that's basically Wolfe's thesis.
Um,
It's the tail wagging the dog.
Very well said. I'd say you're right in the belly of the beast over there at Berlin, Germany. This Bauhaus movement, I believe, began in Germany with the Weimar Republic and especially centered in Berlin. Am I not mistaken there?
Well, it was in Berlin this last year, but it started out in fact, that city of Weimar in 1919.
Hmm.
And then in 1925, it went to Dessau.
Hmm.
And 1932, I think, Berlin, 1933, the Nazis dissolved it. It was just too modern for them. It was too avant-garde. Uh, the man who founded it in 1919, of course, was Walter Gropius. And yeah, that was his brainchild. And the idea behind it was you wanted to create worker housing,
Oh,
and you wanted everything to be machine built in this machine age, uh, by workers, by the proletariat, not
not the bourgeois, right?
not by craftsmen. It was inherently anti-bourgeois. In fact, Wolfe goes on and on about this, making fun of uh, how you defined uh, what Bauhaus was. Well, the most Bauhaus thing was the most non-bourgeois thing, and then you have to get into a discussion about, well, what is bourgeois and what is the antithesis of bourgeois? Is it proletarian? Well, maybe not, because no workers actually, at least in America, in the American context later, no workers wanted to live in these places. They found them very objectionable. In fact, they started calling them these work housing projects. They started calling them the projects, and we know that the projects has a very bad connotation these days. He's from the projects, often a poor black kid, right? He came out of the projects, so just breeding grounds of crime and poverty and drug addiction. So one of the many ironies of Wolfe's book is how he talks about the origins of this glass house project, is to create worker housing in Berlin. In fact, yes, there's a settlement here, settlement. I'm translating from the German. It's called the Hufeisensiedlung. It's the horseshoe settlement. It's down in the south of Berlin. In fact, a good friend of mine lives there. So I have been there on many occasions. And that was designed by a Bauhaus uh, member, Bruno Traut, Traut. And this was worker housing. This is still worker housing to this day. It's very nice worker housing. Many people want to live there, like my friend, and that is to say, it's not my friend living in the socially in the social housing. That is to say, it's state subsidized. My friend doesn't live in that uh, part of it, but that's what the Hufeisensiedlung is. But this idea of taking the Hufeisensiedlung to America and create these worker housing projects, it just fell flat on its face. And what happened then in America is that this workers housing project writ large was transposed to corporate buildings, glass glass houses, steel glass, and reinforced concrete. The Bauhaus was also about getting rid of all the ornament of this Beaux-Arts, historicist style of architecture of the 19th century when it was at its height. It was about leaving that behind, right? So uh, uh, we want simple materials, glass, steel, concrete. We want mechanically reproducible materials. So this isn't the arts and crafts movement of England with William
William
Morris,
Morris. Yeah.
right? No way.
Oh,
You don't want to have anything be handmade, and it's also the less ornament, the better, right? You've heard this phrase, "Form is function." I don't think the Bauhaus ever used that phrase, but that's kind of the idea, right? We just want to have the structure naked to the world. We don't want to hang, plaster doodads on it so the facade looks all fancy and nice like they would have in the 19th century. We want to leave that behind. And it was a reaction to World War One, right? No coincidence that the Bauhaus movement arises in 1919, right? The year after the war, because Europe and Germany in particular, who lost the war, need I remind our viewers, and then they were subject to the Versailles Treaty, which really eviscerated them. Uh, the idea of the Bauhaus was to start from zero, and that's another of the ironies of that Wolfe points out, that this start from zero architectural style was exported to America that didn't have to start from zero. Uh, America came out of the war the victor as the great world power. Not a single shot had been fired by the enemy on American shores. America was better than ever. They weren't starting from zero. So you have all these architects, particularly when the Nazis come to power, because they didn't, as we mentioned, they didn't care for Bauhaus. Um, again, Walter Gropius, Bruno Traut, uh, Mies van der Rohe. He talks a lot about Mies van der Rohe. And they all came and they established themselves in very high positions in America in the mid to late 30s. For example, Gropius was the head of the architectural department at Yale. I mean, he goes from being evicted from his country by the Nazis to getting this plum position at Yale. It's miraculous. And so people started listening to these guys, and it wasn't here. Another one of the ironies. It's just rife with irony, but Wolfe is very big on the ironic twist. Uh, Whereas with the original Bauhaus movement in Germany in the 20s, you had again what Wolfe calls this clerisy, or another term he uses, the art compound. Bunch of intellectual types uh, who are fancying themselves the true cognoscenti, and they will bring the good word to the people, right?
Yeah.
Well, what happened in America is that uh, you had basically businessmen and their wives getting wind of this and saying, "Hey, this is very cool." So again, this notion of status, this European cachet attached to whatever architectural project you imagine for yourself, you can just point to it and say, "Well, that's a Mies van der Rohe. That's a Bauhaus product. Walter Gropius himself designed it."
Mm.
So this is a pretty comprehensive, I think, summary of at least the first part of the book, which takes us up to about 1945.
You talk about America and the influence or lack thereof of the Bauhaus on America. And one of the more interesting parts of this book is when Frank Lloyd Wright, the gold standard of architecture in America at the time, met Walter Gropius, and he must have been horrified to realize this is where my beloved architecture is going through this guy's vision. And Wright was not happy with that, according to this narrative in Tom Wolfe's point of view.
Yeah, well, Frank Lloyd Wright was uh, a working architect. He was actually designing buildings, and that was
Yeah.
one of Wright's complaints, that these guys become famous largely through their theory, just
Oh,
largely through all the manifestos they're issuing, uh,
yeah.
largely simply through the various uh, the books they're writing. In fact, there's a quote in the Wolf where someone approached Wright and said, "Oh, well, did you hear about Le Corbusier?" Le Corbusier is a Frenchman, I think, or maybe he's a Swiss. I think he's a francophone Swiss is what he is. Yes, and he was famous for like the just the bare minimum of structural strength, and then maybe a white exterior, and that's it, right? And then so someone came to Wright and said, yeah, Le Corbusier has erected a building. He said, "Oh, great! Now he can write 4 books about it." So yeah, Wright looked very askance at these hoity-toity European theoreticians.
Coming over to our shores, it's like Germany couldn't invade us militarily, so they invaded us culturally.
Well, they certainly did. I mean, if you want to take that ball and run with it,
Yeah, give me some of
uh,
that.
I mean, you just look at, I'll throw it back in your court here in a second, but just look at the influence of Arnold Schoenberg on modern American classical music in the mid to late 20th century. Maybe you can say a few words on that.
Well, certainly Schoenberg was a close friend of George Gershwin, who was writing the good stuff, the
Yeah,
the easily digestible, the pleasant, the melodious, even the humorous. You often talk about humor in art. Gershwin
yeah,
has a good sense of humor in his music and in his musicals, and in Porgy and Bess, there's a lot of subtle wry humor going on with all the different activities in that opera. And Schoenberg became the professor of music at UCLA
right.
for what was it, 10 to 20 years, somewhere in there. And I knew a woman, one of my students, who had been a student of Schoenberg's in one of his classes. And I asked her, what was it like learning from Schoenberg? And she said, well, it was an honor to be with him. And he didn't bring in all his complicated theories to the classroom. He had to speak down to their level as a music, music 101 or music 102 in the catalog. But I don't know how many times he brought in his ideas to that class. She said he was very pleasant to learn under, and he gave really good lectures about music at UCLA. And you're talking about Gropius getting a position as the head of architecture at Yale. Well, Schoenberg's now the head of LA, UCLA at least, which if you're the head of a department in UCLA, really that might mean you're the number one authority on that in LA itself, because UCLA is one of the leading universities. The other one is USC, University of Southern California. And do you know who was one of the prominent persons in that music department, Kevin, at USC, in their musical department? He, he,
Uh,
he was
I
the
can't.
head. He was the head of the violin department.
Yehudi Menuhin.
Jascha Heifetz.
Oh, okay.
Heifetz was over at USC and Schoenberg was at UCLA. Heifetz was Russian descent, born in Vilnius, Lithuania, and he came over after the communist revolution. So some of these people tried to escape Hitler in Germany, but some of them tried to escape communism in Russia as well. And another person like that is Artur Rubinstein. Sergei Rachmaninoff had to escape the revolution in Russia, and Schoenberg from Germany. So you had all these people were neighbors: Gershwin, Schoenberg, Rachmaninoff. Did I say Heifetz already? I don't. I did.
Yeah.
Okay. There were quite a few expatriates, not only from Germany but Russia, living in LA and its environs, like Brentwood, Beverly Hills, Bel Air, Pacific Palisades, Malibu. We all know these names, and they're even in Kevin's book called Surfer Boy in some cases, like Malibu and Santa Monica and and Palos Verdes.
Yeah.
And it's been said that the greatest accumulation of intellects in the history of the world was in Los Angeles between the wars. Um, can you corroborate that, or did I go off base on some of those ideas there?
I'll go with it. Sure. I'm
Yeah.
inheriting a very proud tradition of intellectual excellence. Why not? But what I was sort of wanted to focus on with my question was, and I'll give you a springboard into it by telling you this little anecdote, which did I even read it here? I might have read it in the Wolf,
Mm.
but I knew it beforehand. Another irony of uh, the musical scene is that a lot of American classical composers, they embraced Schoenberg's 12-tone scale, right? His his dissonant music. But the irony is that a lot of Europeans, like Darius Milhaud, uh, how many others of Lacis?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
We always forget. But a
yeah.
lot of European composers at that time, they were turning to American jazz as their inspiration, as of course our boy George Gershwin did uh, in full.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that Wolf even mentions that you have so it's the Europeans who are looking to America for inspiration. And I think in Wolf's version it would be rightly so, right? Rightly
Rightly
so.
so.
Whereas the Americans, because they're just yearning for status, they don't have this cultural confidence that they should by mid-century after having won a helping to win at least. at very least a couple world wars and their preeminence economically and in many other ways.
And Kevin,
That Americans still did not have the cultural confidence to just look in their own backyard and say, hey, we don't need this Schoenberg guy. We don't need these glass box Bauhaus inspired uh, monstrosities. Look what you got. Look at your own native architecture, which was Frank Lloyd Wright's whole spiel,
yeah,
right? The prairie style, these long horizontal um,
correct.
roofs and blending in organically to the surroundings, using natural materials, brick,
Using
stone, wood,
a waterfall,
and
falling water,
waterfall,
30
whatever it's
feet.
called.
It's a 30-foot high waterfall that was built right through the different stories, or the house was built on that waterfall, and it's called Falling Water. It's considered the greatest edifice on the North American continent by many of the cognoscenti. And I've seen it on a video that I often show, a Frank Lloyd Wright documentary. They spend about 20 minutes in this 1 hour documentary, they spend about 20 minutes on Falling Water, all the different aspects, because it's absolutely pioneering and extremely innovative, but it's not following the Bauhaus rules, right? Um,
Well,
he
again, it's blending in with its landscape,
right.
and the Bauhaus guys, they didn't care about that.
They wanted to get away from that.
Maybe that was even part of their agenda to just have a sort of alienated building in the middle of this of whatever natural surroundings. That wasn't part of their program because it had to be internationalist. It had to be reproducible, these buildings, wherever, uh, by machines, not through craftsmen. There was no contextualizing the building in an individualistic way like Wright and this waterfall house.
Yes.
So no, Wright and Bauhaus were at loggerheads from the beginning. And again, this is what Wolfe emphasizes across a spectrum of cultural spheres,
Mhm.
that Americans we're just woebegone, uh, underconfident losers when it comes to uh, uh, creating our own, or at least appreciating. He thought there was more than enough creation in America, for example, with jazz and Frank Lloyd Wright and Sullivan and others, but appreciating it and not turning their backs on the Native American treasures to try and validate themselves, again, the status idea, through this glomming on to foreign, mostly European imports.
You mentioned Sullivan. Are you talking about Lewis Sullivan, the teacher
Yeah.
of Frank Lloyd Wright? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And he was big in what, 1870s, 1880s.
Yeah,
And
he was the guy behind the skyscraper.
oh, okay. See how
Yeah,
little.
because you had a lot. That was the age of Andrew Carnegie when they were able to
Oh,
mass produce steel girders, strong steel girders. And so at that point in the 80s and 90s,
yeah.
Chicago and elsewhere, uh, you were able to have the steel girders bear the weight of the building and not the walls. That was the reason you couldn't build high skyscrapers, because the walls weren't load bearing after 5 or 6 stories. So
Mm.
you have this technology dovetailing with this ambition to build really high buildings. And then you have Sullivan, and then Frank Lloyd Wright goes in the opposite direction, builds really, really short buildings with lots of horizontal lines.
Interesting. Very interesting.
What I wanted to do, though, before we're actually filling our hour more than we thought, I want to re get back to Wolfe and read a
I
little
want to
bit
hear
of
some of his stuff. Yeah.
because this is what I praise. I praise at the beginning. It's his prose style. I find him hilarious. Sparks come off his prose, and here's at the beginning where he's talking about this Bauhaus agenda of having their works, regardless of whatever else, to be unbourgeois, right? That was a death sentence. If a critic said, "Well, it's nice, but rather bourgeois," and in this sense, they don't necessarily mean it again in the Marxian sense of an economic class, although that was often the class in the recent history of the late 19th, early 20th century that was funding these building projects. Uh, and This is not the sense of it. Bourgeois meaning, well, partially, in opposition to the proletariat, right? And in those European countries, we still had aristocracy, right? So they're all defining themselves against one another. But in Wolf's sense, I think it's mostly conventionality, right? Uh, the unwillingness to take risks creatively. So here's Wolfe, and he's talking about how these Bauhaus guys themselves are trying to figure out what they meant by non-bourgeois. All right. So, but that was only the start. The definitions and claims and accusations and counter accusations and counter claims and counter definitions of what was or was not bourgeois became so refined, so rarefied, so arcane, so dialectical, so scholastic, that finally building design itself was directed at only one thing, illustrating this month's theory of the century concerning what was ultimately, infinitely, and absolutely non-bourgeois. The buildings became theories constructed in the form of concrete, steel, wood, glass, and stucco. Inside and out, they were white or beige with the occasional contrasting detail in black or gray. Bruno Trout, who was a member of Mies van der Rohe's new group, The Ring, had designed his part of the Hufeisen worker housing project in Berlin with red facades. Red front, he would yell, just in case there was someone too dense to get the point. Bruno was a likable sort, and God knew he was profoundly non-bourgeois on the emotional and intellectual level. After all, he was a Marxist, to the point of popped veins on the forehead. He was the kind of man they had naturally assigned to do a worker housing project called Uncle Tom's Cabin. Uncle Tom's Hütte. This is also a worker housing project in the southwest of Berlin, right near the Grunewald. I've seen it. I've been through there, and it's kind of nice, actually. I wouldn't mind living there myself. But a red facade, a color, well, I mean, my God, how very bourgeois. Why didn't he go all the way and put nasturtiums all over the front, the way Otto Wagner did with his Majolika house in Vienna in 1910? Oh, how they sniggered at poor Bruno over his beloved red front. Henceforth, white, beige, gray, and black became the patriotic colors, the geometric flag of all the compound architects. So goodbye, color. On spun that holy tornado, theory, until buildings by compound artists were aimed at very little else. They became supremely, divinely non-functional, even though everything was done in the name of functionalism, functional being one of several euphemisms for non-bourgeois. You get a taste of Wolfe's very high octane prose there.
Very acerbic.
Yeah, and he likes to add up adjectives. He likes to string them together
Yes.
to the point of absurdity. And but he does it well, and I enjoy it.
Who was the other writer we were talking about who strings together adjectives,
Joseph
but
Conrad.
not in such a felicitous manner that Wolf does, right?
Well, it's not a novel, so he's trying to make a polemical point.
Okay.
And so
Yeah.
he's not in a novel, you're trying to create, I've said this a million times, a mental image. And if you pile up those adjectives, the image for me gets blurred.
Gotcha.
And this is just a purely intellectual exercise, so
Yeah.
I can process them and see
So
where they're headed.
it's a real apples and oranges comparison if I'm going to bring Conrad in here because
But that's
he
the
had a
guy who
different aim.
strings them together. It
Yeah, yeah.
strings them together and strings the reader along, I must say.
And there you go. And I would encourage our dozens of viewers to check out our talks on Joseph Conrad. Those were quite interesting. Okay, Kev, we've got about 13 minutes left. How would we want to fill that? Do you have any other passages to read that might be of interest?
Um,
Just so we could hear his really wonderful style a couple more times in different contexts here.
all right. Well, let's keep it in the first part of the book because I think that's the most successful part of the book, where he lays out his thesis. He talks about the origins of um, glass this glass box theory of architecture and how it gets to America. And the rest for me is kind of anticlimactic because it's just him then going on and on about how much he hates this architecture. Uh, so how about if we do this? Where this is where he sees the incongruity of this European Bauhaus architecture in America. And let me see if I can find it. Yes, here we go. So this is in the post-war era now. This is 40s, 50s, this kind of thing. The way Americans lived made the rest of mankind stare with envy or disgust, but always with awe. In short, this has been America's period. This has been. So he's talking about up until 1981 when the book's published. So this is the post World War II uh, bequest of illimitable power that America has has now taken upon itself. So the way Americans lived made the rest of mankind stare with envy or disgust, but always with awe. In short, this has been America's period of full-blooded, go to hell, belly rubbing, wahoo, yahoo, youthful rampage.
Hmm.
And what architecture has she to show for it? An architecture whose tenets prohibit every manifestation of exuberance, power, empire, grandeur, or even high spirits and playfulness as the height of bad taste. We brace for a barbaric yop over the roofs of the world and hear a cough at a concert.
Hmm.
In short, the reigning architectural style in this, the very Babylon of capitalism, became worker housing.
Uh-huh.
Worker housing, as developed by a handful of architects inside the compounds amid the rubble of Europe in the early 1920s, was now pitched up high and wide in the form of Ivy League art gallery annexes, museums for art patrons, apartments for the rich, corporate headquarters, city halls, country estates. It was made to serve every purpose, in fact, except housing for the workers.
Hmm.
It was not that worker housing was never built for workers. In the 1950s and early 1960s, the federal government helped finance the American version of the Dutch and German Siedlungen of the 1920s. Here they were called public housing projects, but somehow the workers, intellectually undeveloped as they were, managed to avoid public housing. They called it simply the projects, and they avoided it as if it had a smell. The workers, if by workers we mean people who have jobs, headed out instead to the suburbs. They ended up in places like Islip, Long Island, and the San Fernando Valley of Los Angeles. And they bought houses with pitched roofs and shingles and clapboard siding, with no structure expressed if there was any way around it, with gaslight-style front porch lamps and mailboxes set up on lengths of stiffened chain that seemed to defy gravity, the more cute and antique touches, the better. And they loaded these houses with drapes, such as baffled all description, and wall-to-wall carpet you could lose a shoe in. And they put barbecue pits and fish ponds with concrete cherubs urinated into them on the lawn out back. And they parked the Buick Electras out front and had Evinrude cruisers up on tow trailers in the carport just beyond the breezeway. This is where we grew up, Northridge and Reseda. He just describes our neighborhood here, and he talks about the San Fernando Valley. I know that's the house we grew up in.
Yep.
Pitched roof, shingles, clapboard sidings, stucco and wood. We even had a gaslight style front porch lamp. Remember that? It was black. You were maybe too young in Northridge. I remember it distinctly.
I don't remember that particular aspect.
Do you remember the barbecue pit in the backyard?
No.
Well, we had all these things that Mr. Wolfe mentions in his little diatribe. So that's right. Our family, we didn't grow up in a housing project. We grew up in that great suburban post-war project of the San Fernando Valley. And these were the kinds of houses we and our like inhabited. So there I was saying, yeah, you're right. I could testify to it. That's exactly correct.
You mean what is exactly correct?
Well, we and those people like us who were middle to lower middle class, some even working class, we didn't live in worker housing projects.
Hmm.
What workers and people who were not substantial earners, they moved out to the suburbs to buy a little house
Right.
that was kind of nice, with a little garden in front, with trees and little brick planters,
Yeah.
and not some mammoth Le Corbusier characterless and faceless edifice. No, the workers wanted their own little house and garden. So
Yeah, when I went to Germany,
ill conceived in the American context, where we don't really and never really did have a Marxian proletariat, because up until very recently, and still the case today, if you don't like your job, if you feel you're being exploited by your capitalist boss, well, you up and leave.
yeah,
You have mobility. If not upward, you have horizontal mobility. Up until very recently, this has been one of the reasons given by social historians why there has never been a very strong working class movement in America. So again, this importation of a European template to an America that is not at all conducive to the flourishing of that project.
Okay, very good. Um, I'd like to finish by saying that when I went to visit you in Berlin in 1997 and then got some work in Chemnitz, where I could have access to Bayreuth for my first visit at some point, I wanted to stay in an apartment, rent a room from somebody down in Chemnitz. And one of them told me I could stay in their house with them and their two kids. And I go down to see it. Not it wasn't a house, it was an apartment complex that was a complete rectangle, no shutters, no drapes, nothing on the windows. And the only thing in the landscape before that project was a big Dempster dumpster for everyone to go and throw their trash away there. So it felt like a stripped down Bauhaus kind of thing at the time. And but you do have to have a place for trash. So you take away all the flowers and the gardens that we got to have in San Fernando Valley, but you only have as decor an ugly Dempster dumpster. And I decided not to go rent that place. I found some other place to go. But that was one of my shocking experiences. And I should have known better because there was a huge Karl Marx head sculpture, 3 stories high, on my way to my job every day that was still left over from the communist era. So I should have known better about these places. They weren't going to be Bel Air townhomes, not at all. That was my that was my one experience with this Bauhaus culture. Just to wrap things up from my end, unless you have things to say, I have one more comment before we finish up here.
Well, I would like to say that uh, although I love Wolfe's writing, uh, I don't necessarily share his disgust for modern architecture.
Okay.
I know what he's driving at. You get steel and glass and mirrored glass to reflect the other steel and glass and mirrored glass building right next to you. What's the point? We're in a hall of
Yeah.
mirrors and it's kind of dull and drab. But there are some nice products of that Bauhaus project. For example, in Berlin, one of my favorite buildings is the Die Neue Nationalgalerie, the new National Gallery. And that was designed by Mies van der Rohe. And it's on an elevated surface. Got to walk up a
Mhm.
few steps. It's massive, and it's just glass. It's a glass, elongated cube with steel pillars, 2 in front, 2 on both sides, and then 2 in the back. So you have 8 pillars. What they're supporting is not anything to do with the glass core, but it's a steel roof with a big overhang, right? I mean, the Bauhaus was theoretically against cornices. This is a massive cornice that goes all around and it overhangs the glass cubicle. And the glass cubicle is for the exhibitions. But then you go downstairs, something you can't see at all from the street, and then you have the permanent exhibition. It's lovely, and I would see this thing every day when I was a doctoral student doing my research for my dissertation in Berlin, in West Berlin. I was doing it in both halves of the city, East and West Berlin. But when I was in West Berlin, I was often in the Staatsbibliothek, and I'd sit there doing my work, and I'd look out the window, and I'd see this Mies van der Rohe Neue Nationalgalerie. It's imprinted on my memory, and it's a beautiful kind of less is more. That was Mies van der Rohe's motto. He came up with it. Less is more, minimalistic building. And also, the Staatsbibliothek where I was working, that was designed by Hans Scharoun, who was not at all Bauhaus. I don't know how you would categorize him, but all his stuff looks like a spaceship. This is also the Philharmonie, which was across the way from the Bibliothek, Staatsbibliothek, and across the way from the Neue Nationalgalerie. So you have this whole quarter filled with all this modern architecture. I like modern architecture, is what I'm trying to say. I don't share, I don't share the disgruntled attitude toward it that Wolfe does. But he had to, come up with a book. He wanted to lay into something that kind of, you know,
Well, Kev,
rubbed
I
him the
think,
wrong way. So you got to take the ball and run with it. I understand that. I'm not even sure he believes everything he says here, because I think some of the like I say, with the Mies van der Rohe Neue Nationalgalerie, get on the internet and look it up, folks. I think that's a beautiful example of what the Bauhaus project was all about. So this is the modern. I think it was built in 1969. I think this is his last design before his death. This is a beautiful efflorescence of the Bauhaus movement. And yeah, if it only came up with this Neue Nationalgalerie, then I would say it legitimated itself then.
sounds good. I like some modern architecture as well. We have this Disney Hall in Los Angeles downtown for the LA Philharmonic. And I'm sure you've seen pictures of it, even though you haven't.
That's Frank Gehry, right?
Frank Gehry, and he does a lot of the buildings in LA. And I would say that a lot of these Bauhaus, I don't know that that's Bauhaus because that's
I
got
think
all,
isn't that postmodern?
yeah, that's more postmodern. But some of it's pleasing because it's different, because it's innovative. And I agree with you on
Yeah,
that.
yeah. I'm with you. I mean, I'm such the architectural unsophisticate that I just come down on the side of, well, it's kind of fun. Yeah, well, let's look at it,
Yeah,
and
right, right.
it's kind of different, kind of new.
Kev, this is where I think you and I can both agree with Tom Wolfe on the following point. Modern art and modern architecture aren't bad just by definition. They're often it's often quite good. And we're going to be talking about the modern
Yeah,
art next week or the next 2 weeks. You'll and I will decide the painted word
yeah.
by Tom Wolfe on modern art. And I already read the first chapter, and it's already easier for me to grasp it because he's talking about artists I know and I'm familiar with when you're talking
It's
about painted art.
it's a real companion piece to from Bauhaus to our house. It's the same basic theory. We won't get into it now, but it's basically the mirror image of from Bauhaus to our house, the painted word, and uh, how Wolf criticizes it.
And I think,
There's some more tail wagging the dog
mm,
involved.
okay. And I wanted to finish by saying, although we may like some of this modern art, I think what you and I and Tom Wolfe will agree on, perhaps, is we don't necessarily need dogma in our architecture or in our art. And a lot of these modern liberal Marxist people try to foist their theories on us as if it's dogma. And and that's where we would agree with Tom Wolfe. We don't need to make this a dogma. We can have variety of styles and they can all be pretty interesting. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, just being a natural contrarian myself,
sure.
and maybe it's the Irish blood in me as well. Uh, every time I get the feeling you're trying to lay a trip on me, you're going to get a lot of resistance, baby.
Yep.
Even if what you have to offer is quite good,
Correct.
and that's, for example, my attitude. I'm not going to see it toward the new movie version of the Odyssey. I get the feeling that they're trying to snooker me in some way
There you go.
with some kind of program that they have. So even if it's a great movie, I'm not going to see it because I get the feeling there's a little bit of
Liberal dogma.
there's an attempt, an oblique attempt, if only, to socially engineer. And I hate that. I'm not a collectivist, never
Correct.
have been. I'm an individualist. I think that the individual is the most important unit. And I so yeah, I immediately join ranks with Wolfe in that respect,
Correct.
uh, because that was it was programmatic Bauhaus. They were a Marxist organization, at least in the thrust of their thought, to be anti-bourgeois, to be a an art form for the worker, to create collectivist housing,
Right.
and yeah, that's that's not my bag, man. No way.
Give us some good modern architecture, but leave the dogma aside. Um, I think that's the main theme going on here. Not only from Tom Wolfe, but between you and I as well. Um, so that brings us to the end of our hour. I appreciate you and all your thoughts. Quite compelling and quite interesting. We weren't sure we would be able to fill up this hour because it's a rather thin volume here,
Yeah.
and but we did. So thank God for that. And we'll be back next week, Kev, or 2 weeks. Painted
I think
Word.
2 weeks at this stage. Right.
Okay, 2 weeks we'll do for now on, at least for
And
now.
I just want to say one thing.
Hmm.
So, what do you like, Kevin? I like Art Deco. Art Deco is my baby. And there are a couple pictures in the Wolf book of great Art Deco buildings. We know the Chrysler Building in New York and the Empire State Building. That's Art Deco.
That's good stuff.
They have these little Christmas tree ornaments on top.
Oh, wow.
That that would have sent the Bauhaus guys into a conniption fit.
Yeah, we also got the Bullocks Wilshire. Are you familiar with that building down here?
Perfectly. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But
And the
that's
Max Factor building
yeah,
and
cool.
the Pantages Theater,
We get some of that in
Hollywood.
Hollywood. Yeah. All right, everybody. Thank you for watching. We'll be back in a couple of weeks, and we'll see you then. Thanks, Kevin.
All right. See you later.
All right. Bye bye.